Hello learners, this is Elina Mishra. Welcome to Snebs Biology. We will now start with another important thing in this chapter is inflorescence. So let's start. So the inflorescence is the arrangement of flowers on the axis. Now the axis which we are talking of is known as peduncle or the inflorescence axis, and the stalk of the flower is known as pedicle. Some modified leaf which develops in the axil of flower is known as bract. So the bract are present in the peduncle, and some small leaves also present in the pedicle is known as bracteole. So all these inflorescence, they are classified into three categories: racemose inflorescence, cymose inflorescence, and special type of inflorescence. So first we discuss about the first two. So for this we need to understand the basic difference between the racemose and cymose type of inflorescence. In racemose, the main axis, that is the peduncle, never terminates into flower, whereas in case of cymose, the main axis is going to have limited growth and it will always terminates into a flower. Once the flower grows, the growth of main axis terminates. So in racemose, we can say that the main axis grows continuously, whereas in case of cymose, it has a limited growth and it will always terminates into a flower. This is the point 1. Next comes to second point. Look at the diagram. There is the main axis. The flowers are acropettaly arranged. The lower flowers are bigger, and as we move towards the tip, the flower size goes on becoming smaller. So whenever we use this term acropetal, means the lower flowers are bigger and older and upper flowers are younger and smaller. In case of basipetal arrangement, look at the diagram. There is the main axis and it has terminated into a flower. So this is going to the first flower, then the branch arises. The branch give rise to another flower which is smaller. So the upper flowers are older and bigger and the lower flowers are younger and smaller. This arrangement is known as basipetal arrangement. So this type of arrangements are found in case of cymose type of inflorescence. Now come into the third thing. In case of racemose inflorescence, the main axis is continuously grows and the branches which are given out, they are lateral. That means the flowers or the branches would arise laterally. In this case, the main axis develops only from one single main axis, and that's why we're calling it monopodial. In this case, the axis is made up of only one straight structure, so we called it monopodial. In case of cymose, here the main axis is terminates into a flower, it gives rise to a branch and it gives rise to the another flower. From here, it gives rise to the another branch which give rise to the flower, and so on. So in this case, the main vertical axis which we seen is made up of small parts of all branches. That is, the main axis which is known as podium is made up of fusion of parts of different branches, and that's why we called it sympodial. So these three are the basic technical differences between the racemose and cymose type. In racemose, the main axis never terminates into a flower and grows continuously, whereas in cymose, the main axis always terminates into a flower and has limited growth. The second difference is the arrangement of flowers. So the flowers are arranged in acropetal manner in case of racemose inflorescence, whereas in case of cymose, they are arranged in basipetal manner. In case of racemose inflorescence, the main axis is monopodial, that is, it made up of single axis. In case of cymose, the main axis is sympodial, that is, it is made up of different parts or fusion of different branches. That's why we called it sympodial. Clear? So we have already understood the basic difference between racemose and cymose. So this racemose inflorescence, where the main axis is continuously grows, never terminate into a flower, has acropetal arrangement of flower and has a monopodial axis. In this, there are a variety of subtypes. The first one is known as raceme. So raceme is actually a blueprint of racemose inflorescence. Blueprint means exactly how we define racemose inflorescence. The same thing is seen in case of this. So look at the diagram. There is the main axis which is known as peduncle. On this peduncle are arranged flowers in an acropetal manner. Acropetal manner means the lower flowers are going to bigger, and as we move up, the upper flowers are going to be smaller and smaller, and the flowers have a stalk. They are called pedicellate flowers. So the flowers are pedicellate, that means with stalk, and the flowers are bisexual, arranged in acropetal manner. So this is a typical racemose inflorescence, and this type is known as raceme. Every flower would have its own stalk. Arrangement is going to be acropetal, and the central axis, which is monopodial, is known as peduncle. Nothing comes at the tip, that's why continuously grows. So example of racemes are mustard, radish, etc. These are two important examples of raceme inflorescence. Now the second inflorescence is panicle. In panicle, it is a branched raceme. That means it would be raceme type. But in raceme, it was a simple only one axis. In this case, there would be a compound one. So look at the diagram. There is one raceme. On this raceme, the lower flowers are going to be bigger and the upper flowers are going to be smaller. So this is one raceme. Here the axis is continuously grows, but it is in the form of a branch. Now comes the next raceme. It is going to be small than the previous one. The flowers are going to be arranged in acropetal manner. This is again going to smaller than the lower one. So this is branched raceme. The flowers are arranged in acropetal manners, but here the racemes are arranged in acropetal manner, and on every raceme the pattern is same. The example of this is sessile penia, that is gulmohar. In sessile penia we found compound raceme which is known as panicle. The third type of inflorescence is known as spike. In the spike, again the same thing, main axis grows continuously, but here the flowers are bisexual but sessile, that is without stalk. Arrangement is again going to be acropetal, but because the flower is not having the stalk, it is directly attached on axis. So sessile flowers are there and they are bisexual. This is found in case of a buttlebrush, Amaranthus and Adhatoda. So in all these three types, we have seen that the main axis continuously grow. It is a characteristic feature of racemose inflorescence. The floral arrangement is always acropetal, whether it's simple or a branched, or the flowers are sessile. So lower flowers are always going to be bigger and upper flowers are always going to be smaller and younger. Main axis is not having anything at the tip, that means it is going to grow continuously. The fourth type of racemose inflorescence is known as catkin, and it is very similar to spike. In catkin, the inflorescence is pendulous. Pendulous means it is going to be hanging, and the flower arrangement is same. The lower flowers are bigger, and as we move towards the tip, the flowers become smaller and smaller. In this case, the flowers are sessile but unisexual, and this is the only difference between the catkin and spike. So in spike, we said the flowers are sessile but they were bisexual and it is upright. In catkin, it is pendulous, that means it is hanging. The example of the catkin is morus or mulberry. So in mulberry, we find the floral axis or the complete inflorescence is hanging. So these are sessile unisexual flowers. The next one is spikelet. Spikelet is a very tiny spike, but there are few additional things which are there. So look at the diagram. In this case, there are bracts and bracteoles. Certain bracts do not have anything in the axil, that means nothing grows in the axillary part. And there are some part where in the axil grows the inflorescence. So if the bracts is not having anything in the axillary part, we called it empty glume. This is actually a bract. And if there is something in the axillary region, we called it fertile glume. Now coming to the actual thing which is on the inflorescence. This inflorescence has one more structure which is known as palea. Palea is the modified bracteole. So there is a bract which is modified into glume and bracteole which is modified into palea. Now there are two structures which are known as lodicules. These lodicules are nothing but the modified tepals, and then there are three stamens which is known as the male reproductive part of the flower, and at the tip we find pistil having stigma style ovary which is known as the female reproductive part of the flower. If there are another fertile glume in its axil, again there would be the same kind of structure, but it is going to be smaller. That means here also the acropetal arrangement is followed. This type of inflorescence seen in case of wheat, rice, grasses, etc. The sixth one is known as spadix. In case of spadix, the axis on which flowers are arranged becomes thick and fleshy. The flowers are sessile and unisexual. The lower flowers are the female flowers. They are sessile, and towards the upper side are sessile male flowers. And there is very brightly colored structure which surrounds it, which is known as spathe. So spathe are nothing but the modified bract. This is brightly colored because flowers are sessile and they are hidden inside. The spadix is found in banana, canna, etc. So in all these six, the same kind of structure is seen. That means the main axis is continuously longish, acropetal arrangement is there whether it's pedicellate or sessile, and the main axis is single, that means monopodial, and the main axis is very long. Now next come into another types where the main axis is not that long, but the basic characteristic feature, that is it is going to continuously grow and it is never terminates into flower, remains same. So the first one is Corymb. In Corymb the main axis is not that long, so if this has the shorter main axis, then the nodes are also very close to each other, and the flowers which arise they are again in acropetal manner. But if we observe it carefully, we find that as we are moving towards the upper side, the length of pedicel is decreasing. That means the lower older flowers has longest pedicel, and in the upper flowers the length of pedicel is getting shorter. But because of this differential length of the pedicel, all the flowers they comes to lie on the same plane, but the main axis remains shorter. So in case of Corymb, the main axis is short and the flowers are in acropetal order, but the length of the floral stalk or pedicel varies. The lower flowers have longest pedicel and the upper flowers have shorter. All the flowers are come to lie in the same plane. So this is the simple corymbs. Example of simple corymb is candy tuft. And when the branching is found in simple corymb, we called it compound corymb. So simply it is the corymb of corymb. The example of this is cauliflower. In case of cauliflower, if we cut cauliflower vertically, we find that there is a compact structure which is axis, and then there are tiny inflorescence which comes to lie on the same plane. So this is a corymb. A very similar is the next type which is called the umbel. In umbel also the main axis is short and it is much shorter as compared to corymb, and also the flowers they arise from the same point. So if it is very short, then the nodes are present very close to each other, and all the flowers they arise from the same point. So here all the flowers they have going to same length of their pedicel, because of which they are on the same plane. Here flowers have same length of pedicel. In case of umbel, we have two categories. One is simple umbel and other one is compound umbel. So example of simple umbel is onion. In case of compound umbel, here each flower of umbel is replaced by an umbel. So simply the umbel of umbels. So when the simple umbel inflorescence shows branching, then we called it compound umbel. So the example of compound umbel is coriander, carrot, etc. Now comes to last two type of racemose inflorescence. That is, in these two, the main axis, that is the peduncle, is going to either become flat or globular. So first one is capitulum. In capitulum, the main axis is flat. Instead of a long structure, it becomes a flat disc-like structure which is known as receptacle. Now look at the diagram. So just imagine it little bit. If it was a long axis, the flowers would have developed from this lower node. Now if we compress this, if we press this long structure, then the nodes going to be in outer side. Basically it is the same axis which has become flattened. So outer flowers are going to be bigger. As we move in, the flower size is going to becoming smaller and smaller. Here if it was a long axis, then lower side would have been the bigger flower. Here upper side have been the smaller flower. When we press it, the upper part comes in the center. That means arrangement is still acropetal. In case of capitulum, example is sunflower, soncus, etc. In sunflowers, the outer flowers, they have this big yellow colored structure. These are known as the ray floret. And the central flower, which are in the disc-like axis, they are known as disc floret. Next comes to the last one, where the main axis is more or less globular. So the main axis has become bulb-like, and this type is known as capitate. All the flowers, they are arranged in this globe-like or spherical main axis. We find that the flowers, when they get arranged, it appears in a form of a ball structure. And the example is mimosa, acacia, where we find the capitate type of inflorescence. So here we seen 10 types of inflorescence under racemose. First 6 categories where the main axis was very long. In next 2 where the main axis is shorter, and next 2 where the axis become more or less flattened. So the basic structure, basic property remains same. Next we will discuss about cymose inflorescence and some special type of inflorescence. So don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for more updates. Thank you.